Welcome to another Photo Mishmash, episode 9. I'm Toby.
And I'm Christina.
And tonight's tagline, we don't always give a tagline, but tonight we are. This will be the only partially lit by candlelight photography podcast you watch this week.
It's a pretty long tagline.
Sometimes you need a tagline. Photo Mishmash, candlelit photography extravaganza.
Okay.
Moving right in. So I got a new segment called the Week in Review.
Okay.
Where we just review what I did this week.
All right, let's do that.
That's all that's really important. No, I did want to touch on a couple of things that leads into the photo critiquing.
Okay.
So I think one is the steel wool.
Yeah.
We experimented with. It's actually Sunday. Some people consider... No, it was Saturday.
Was it Saturday?
So that was... Let's talk about 2 weeks in review. And we did steel wool and had a lot of fun. Have some plans to go out and do some more steel wool soon. Have a very wide angle lens sitting over there for some different shots that we're going to try. 12 to 24. It's nice, I'm borrowing that. And we don't own any really wide angle lenses. I get asked for advice on wide angle lenses very often. I can give advice, I know which ones are the best. I've used lots of them, but I don't own any because I don't have enough of a reason to. There are certain times where they're fun, but not consistently enough that we're going to use them in our work. We just don't have them. But I'm excited to play with it.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece of Week in Review that I wanted to mention was we had probably one of our best critiquing episodes.
I think so too.
This past week. 30 minutes, no fluff, just a lot of great images from you all. And I just wanted to say that I'm humbled. I am impressed. Just the quality and the quantity of work that is being added to that group daily is really impressive. And I don't want any of you, I'm not only am I humbled, but slightly intimidated about putting my own work in there. And I could certainly see beginners, first time to DSLR, and that's a lot of my audience. You may be a little shy and be like, wow, there's this incredible picture in this exotic location. We had those shots from Noah, I think it was, of the half under the water, half above water, and then he had another shot that was that gray landscape, and those are amazing photos, and there are other amazing photos in there, but we want all of the photos. And I think we reviewed probably the cutest, sweetest photo yet last week. Would you agree?
Yeah, it was very cute. Very sweet photo. Mm-hmm.
And
we're going to talk about it today, actually.
Right now, that's my lead-in.
Oh, your segue.
My segue. And it was a moment of a little boy turning 5, about to blow out his candle.
Mm-hmm.
He's really looking at the camera. His sister, I'm going to make the assumption it's his sister.
Or his friend.
Or his friend. Is so excited for him. Can we with the light on bright, can we recreate the scene real quick? You be the little boy. Here's the cake in front of you. Okay, and I'm the little girl.
That was so silly.
Except they were much cuter. It was silly.
Oh, yeah.
But in that discussion, it was kind of it was a snapshot. It was capturing a moment. It wasn't this incredible piece of art. But in the discussion of critiquing it, we talked about, you had suggested that it may have been better if the person who had taken the picture hadn't used flash.
Right.
That they had let the picture be lit by the candle. There was one single 5 candle. You know those fun number candles on the cake. So because we had that tagline, or because we wanted to do this, I put the tagline on the show. We wanted to look at what a shot looked like, or video, we're going to do video since this is a video podcast, looks like lit by one candle. So just to share with you real quick, and then we're going to move on. So with the magic of snapping my fingers, you're going to snap.
Can I snap?
You can snap.
Okay.
So Christina lit by one candle. She's the little boy. I'm the little girl, so excited, coming in on the side. And we really have no point in showing you this other than it is possible. And we're not saying that this is what the person should have done. Well, you suggested that maybe they would have had a fun picture if it had been lit by one single candle. But it is quite a bit of light that one single candle gives you. Now this is going to be noisy because we're shooting at ISO 4000, and we're choosing to shoot this with the 70D, which he was shooting it with the D5300. That's quite similar in that respect. You're going to burn me. Okay, let's turn the lights back on, blow that candle out, and continue on with their segments. So, good. One other thing that we wanted to touch back on was a few weeks ago when we were doing a podcast, we had talked about different aspect ratios. We could stop the recording on that one too. And the fact that you thought that really ultra wide was, well, you said really you really like the ultra wide aspect ratio, and I said 16:9, and you said.
No, I said. Well, I thought that there was a wider aspect ratio than that.
And I said, no, I don't think there is. And multiple people pointed out in the comments that there is, in fact, a wider aspect ratio than 16:9, so I shouldn't be such a know-it-all. They're right. There is 21:9 and 2.35:1. And those are very, very, very similar. I got a quick graphic I'll throw up that kind of shows you the differences between 21:9. I didn't do the 2.35:1 because it's so close to 21:9 and 16:9. And so I don't know any cameras that shoot at 21:9, your consumer DSLRs, but maybe some of the Blackmagic. I don't know. We'll see. But so we wanted that. And also...
well, the Magic Lantern has firmware.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned that.
Yeah, the Magic Lantern has firmware that can actually allow you to shoot at an ultra-wide aspect ratio, like 21:9.
Mm-hmm.
And our friend Micah, that's how I found out about it. Our videographer friend uses it during weddings, and I just like the way that he shoots at that ultra-wide angle.
Ultra-wide angle. Well, no, careful, not angle.
Ultra-wide aspect
ratio. Right. And there's no one being better than another. It's just a different format to shoot at.
Yep.
And Christina just mentioned Magic Lantern. That's something I'd like to talk more about in the future. That is alternative firmware, open source, that you can run on Canon EOS cameras that isn't so user-friendly, but just opens up a variety of possibilities that you can do with your camera. Built-in time-lapse, additional aspect ratios like the 21:9, raw video, which is huge. You need fast cards. That doesn't work with all the EOS cameras. But so there are some really neat features, and like I said, I do want to talk about that in the future. So we'll come back and talk about that. And you had also mentioned that there would be decent bokeh at 300. This is completely different. But another thing where you said something and I said no, and then you said, I think so, and I said no. And she turns out to be right. You would have good bokeh at 300 millimeters with a 6.3 aperture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's a good segue into the next segment, because I just mentioned a word, bokeh. Photography is full of these kind of terms, jargon, words from other languages, and I thought that I know a lot of them are confusing. I've been confused by them in the past, as recently as yesterday, until I looked it up on Wikipedia. Not bokeh, I know that one. But there are others. And I thought we could spend a little time tonight discussing some different jargon, terms, and kind of get that out of the way so anybody watching this, we can all be on the same page and say, oh, when he said he really likes this lens because it's so fast, he means... And we can get into that.
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, tonight's discussion topic. Oh, and then we'll do news.
Sure.
Okay.
So what's our first term?
Our first term. Well, I think our first term that we should talk about is ones surrounding aperture. And let's make sure everybody's comfortable with aperture first, of course. Aperture simply refers to the opening in the lens that's controlled by these little leaves. We're not talking about the shutter, but these little leaves or blades is another way to say them, that close down and open up to control the amount of light coming in through the lens. The bigger the opening, the smaller your number. It's a fraction. That's why it's backwards. We usually just don't write it with the 1. But you see it, f/2.8, and you just pretend the 1 is there instead of the f. As you close it down, your number becomes larger.
And as you open it up, again, the more light that goes through the lens into the sensor, and as you close it down, the less light. So it's a little bit confusing in terms of the numbers. But yeah, I think if you look at it in terms of fractions instead of just whole numbers, then it becomes a little bit, it makes sense a lot more.
Right. 1 over 2 is a much bigger number than 1 over 11.
Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you don't have to spend a ton of time thinking about that. I think it becomes comfortable. But so when we say, and we've said this before on this podcast, shoot wide open. What are we talking about?
That means that we're shooting at the given lens's maximum aperture. So different lenses have different maximum apertures. Some
You
zoom
can grab
lenses,
that 50 right there.
This 50, for example, is a 51.2, and that means that is its maximum aperture. Some zoom lenses have variable maximum apertures, so when you're zoomed out all the way at its smallest focal length, its aperture can be, for example, for this one,
4.5.
It's 4.5, and as the more you zoom, the aperture, the maximum aperture changes. I think this one is at
5.6.
5.6. So the maximum aperture just refers to the number or the widest that the lens can open.
Mm-hmm. And so shooting wide open means to shoot it at that maximum aperture. And we may be saying that because we think you should have gotten more light into the picture, and so you could have raised your shutter speed to avoid blur. Or maybe we're saying that because shooting wide open usually creates a very shallow depth of field. And let's see, do we have any more to talk about with aperture? Oh, we'll stop down. That's a more general term.
Yeah, so, with, I guess, keeping on talking about shooting wide open, there's lots of other terms associated with that I think we kind of wanted to touch on briefly. For example, vignetting, or not vignetting, I'm sorry, chromatic aberration. That can happen when you shoot wide open because the lens isn't, we talked about the sweet spot of the lens, which is this aperture number and I guess focal length even, where the lens performs at its best. So when it's wide open, it's not performing at its best, which can cause chromatic aberration. And what chromatic aberration is a kind of colored ghosting at the edges of really high contrast areas. So for example, you're shooting something that has, very dark colors against really light colors.
Leaves backlit against a bright sky.
Yeah, or just anything that's really dark and really light. The contrast is very strong. You will see areas or lines of magenta, green, purple, or blue. The colors kind of change. But
most commonly magenta.
I've seen about everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's mostly magenta, but it doesn't matter. So the point is that this chromatic aberration kind of degrades the quality of the image, and a lot of the cameras that we shoot with will compensate for that in camera, so it'll correct some chromatic aberration, but you'll still see some of it when you import it into the computer, and then you can correct for that later on. But so shooting wide open will sometimes create a lot of chromatic aberration in your pictures. I feel like there was another thing that we wanted to talk about in relation that was related to that.
To aperture? Well, the fast, referring to a lens as fast.
Yeah.
Does not refer necessarily to its focusing speed or its ability to capture action, but again, talks about how much light can be let in through its aperture. So a fast lens is typically a lens that has a very wide maximum aperture.
Yeah, so a 1.2 is a really fast lens, or
even 1.8.
Or a 2.8, that's like a zoom lens that's a 2.8.
Yeah.
That's pretty fast.
There's no hard and fast rule, though, about what to call a fast lens, but usually it is those wider apertures.
Yeah.
And I think they're called, I don't know why that term is fast. Should have looked that one up maybe, because it's...
That is interesting.
It can allow a lot of light in a shorter period of time because it has such a wide maximum aperture.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about opening up your aperture. Again, that's going wider. We talk about closing your aperture down, and we'll use the term...
Yeah, go ahead.
Stopping down.
Yeah.
Which isn't particular just to aperture. It simply means changing the settings in your camera to allow less light in.
Yeah, so you can either stop up or stop down. And, by stopping down, you would effectively be closing your aperture so that opening would be a lot smaller. And the number would be larger.
Or increasing your shutter speed.
Or increasing your shutter speed.
Because then your shutter speed would be a shorter amount of time. That would let in less light.
Or lowering your ISO as well.
Right.
So every time you stop down, it means that you're allowing less light to hit the sensor. So your picture will be darker as a result of it. Stops of light, in most cameras, the standard, I believe, every time you click, so every 3 clicks equals 1 stop of light.
Of any?
So every click is actually a third of a stop. So, for example, if I'm changing the shutter speed on my Canon 5D, the dial that's right next to the shutter button controls the shutter speed. That's the way that I have it set, but you can set it differently. So every time I click to the right 3 times, or every time I click to the right, I believe I am stopping up a third of a stop.
Yes.
And every time I click to the left, I'm stopping down a third of a stop.
Yep.
Same with the aperture, same with the ISO.
The ISO on the Canon Rebels, you don't have third stop control.
Oh, that's right.
You got the 200, 400, 800. That's full stop.
That's correct.
On the 5D Mark III, on the 70D, you do have the 1/3 stop. And in auto mode, you have 1/3 stops. But it's a good point. I still sometimes in my head say, let's say I realize that I should go to a faster shutter speed, and I'll go 1, 2, 3. And then I know I need to counteract that faster shutter speed by opening up my aperture, and I want to compensate the same amount. So then I go to my aperture dial and I do in my head real quick 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And then I know I've done a full stop of each to make them match.
Right. So that's a good way of, creatively using your settings or not creatively, but, using your settings in a creative way. So, for example, you want to prioritize aperture and you want to shoot wide open, and you click, 2 times to open your lens at its maximum aperture. Then you should click, you should do 2 clicks the opposite way for your aperture to stop down a little bit, so you get the same.
Me?
Right, the same, pretty much.
Okay.
The same exposure.
It's time to move on.
Okay.
Okay, next term. I think that covers aperture pretty good. Shutter speed, pretty straightforward. It's the amount of time your shutter is open, measured usually in tenths or hundredths of a second, can be as much as 1,000th of a second. Or it could be as long as 30 seconds or a minute, depending on different modes you're using in the camera. ISO, we talked about, is just your sensitivity of the sensor. How sensitive the sensor is to the light that's coming in through the lens. Boosted electronically. In the old days, it used to be your film speed.
Yep. And ISO, for those of you who don't know, stands for International Standards Office. Or is it Office?
I don't know. I don't know why you're going to start to say something.
I know what it stands for, and I just
doesn't matter.
Just forgot. Anyway, the point is that it's completely irrelevant to what it actually does, and there's no.
It's one of those holdovers from a long time ago. Yeah.
International Standard Organization. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Put a comment down below if she's wrong, because then that'll make up for.
He just wants to prove me wrong.
That'll make up for last time. F-stop.
Yes, f-stop. That also refers to the aperture. So whatever number your aperture is set at, that's your f-stop.
Yep. So like f2.8.
What does F stand for? Do you know?
No.
I don't either. I wonder if it stands for fast.
No. Maybe fraction. Now we're just looking like dummies. But there is another. Somebody asked David, I think. Yes, David asked about T-stops.
I don't know anything about that.
This is more of a cinema term. So an f-stop measures the amount of light that's capable of coming through those blades after they've closed down. There's some kind of opening there, and it's a fraction of. I really think f is a fraction. It is a fraction of your focal length and all that stuff. T is a measurement of the actual transmission of light all the way through the lens and hitting the sensor. That is usually going to be close to your f-stop, but not quite the same, not quite as good. because there is some light that's lost every time it goes through a lens. Usually the higher the quality of the lens, the closer your t-stop and f-stop are to each other. The lower quality, the more the light is lost because the glass is kind of cheap, it reflects a little bit. Think about it every time you look at the end of your lens. There's a reflection there. That means that some of the light that's hitting that lens is not going into the sensor but being reflected back to your eyes. And plus there's just stuff inside the lens. It's typically used in cinema where your really high quality lenses, and this is why if you look at your Canon Cine, C-I-N-E lenses, they are $10, $20, $30,000 lenses. They are incredibly carefully quality controlled to have a t-stop that is exactly the same as their f-stop or very close to it at least, and there is no variation over the course of like shooting a film because you would notice a change in the darkness and lightness over. Just like you do in a time lapse. Remember, one of my tips is lock your aperture, so you're kind of basically locking down that t-stop so that there isn't any variation in the aperture blades. It's a little bit of a mix bag there in discussion, but yeah, okay. You don't need to know about t-stop, but I thought it was interesting, and I did a little bit of reading about it because I understood the idea, but I wasn't really sure why people cared a whole lot. And you don't really need to know what you're doing. It doesn't control your depth of field or anything like that.
That's just, good knowledge.
Okay. But depth of field is?
Depth of field is the distance in the photograph that is in focus.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. The larger your aperture, the smaller number, the greater your depth of field is going to be. And there's something called a hyperfocal distance within that as well, and that's not something you need to know a whole lot about unless you're doing a lot of landscape photography, and then it would be useful to know. It is the distance at which, for a given aperture, where you focus, everything beyond that point will be in focus. Basically to infinity. Not basically. To infinity it will be in focus. To infinity and beyond. It will be in focus. And actually from that point you focused halfway back towards your camera, half of that distance will also be in focus. And so that's a good, you should start to kind of study your lens. Depth of field calculators online will help you calculate that. So you know when you go out that you may only need to shoot at f8 for what you're focusing on, that pretty orchard tree in the foreground and the mountains to be sharp in the background. But you might think you need to go to f11 or f15, and you're killing yourself with shutter speed because you're closing your aperture down more than you need to. So there's a point in which it's important to know your hyperfocal distance. Depth of field, hyperfocal distance, circle of confusion. Don't worry about that one.
Yeah, that's not that one.
That one's confusing and not really important to know.
We're going to talk about distortion.
Oh, distortion and chromatic. You mentioned chromatic aberration already. Typically seen when you're shooting wide open and or with cheaper lenses.
In high contrast areas. And chromatic aberration is a type of distortion. So another type of distortion would be barrel distortion, which happens when you're shooting with a really wide angle lens. And again, higher end lenses will have a lot less distortion, but for the most part there's a lot of edges that get stretched out and,
warping towards you or away from you.
Right, and you've seen like a fisheye has, a circle and everything's just kind of, in spherically.
Right, that's serious distortion.
Right.
You want that because it's a fisheye.
Right. And so that's an example of barrel distortion.
Yep.
Another kind of distortion that can happen is if you're shooting with, a pretty standard lens like a 50 and you're shooting at a kind of an awkward angle and there's a lot of lines, whether in architectural lines or just, any straight lines that you shoot from a very low angle that get distorted. And so you have this kind of, strange, not realistic perspective. Not realistic in terms of you wouldn't notice that in real life. So that's another type of distortion.
Yep. No. And if you want to see an example of that, I have a perfect example of that in the video I did this week of kind of a walkthrough of Lightroom and editing. I shot the front side of a bank with big stone pillars with the really nice lens, but I was shooting at a very angle, and you see exactly how Christina's hands just went. They go whoop off the screen at a nice like Y. Y-M-C-A.
Yep.
What else were you going to say?
That's it.
Oh, okay,
I think.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those, distortion can be corrected for to some degree. Chromatic aberration, many of our cameras correct for it automatically now in the settings, and then also in Lightroom, you can correct for it.
Yeah. But you will sacrifice something in the image. So very light chromatic aberration can be corrected for, but very harsh chromatic aberration will leave you with very gray edges. And if you try to correct lines, architectural lines in the camera, you have to make sure that you leave enough room around the edges for to allow for cropping, because you are going to lose part of the image when you skew corners of the image to kind of get the lines to be straight. So you have to be thoughtful about, how much are you willing to sacrifice.
Okay. Switching gears, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a couple of different questions that or terms I asked you all to throw some terms out. But another one, high-speed sync.
High-speed sync. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because I don't feel like I can really talk in depth about it. But basically that means that when you set your flash to high-speed sync, it overrides the maximum sync speed. So when you're shooting with a speed light, most cameras have a maximum shutter speed that you can shoot at. For Canon, it's 200, and I believe for Nikon is 250, 1/250th of a second for Nikon, 1/200th of a second for Canon.
If you usually if the speed light's on your camera, it will physically not let you go above that shutter speed, right? You turn the dial and it will just stop
happens.
there at that limit. I've had people write and say my shutter speed won't go higher than 1/200th of a second. I say, do you have the pop-up flash up or do you have a speed light on? And the answer is always yes. Second, if you do, some third-party flashes in the cameras don't talk to each other necessarily, and they'll let you. And what you'll get is banding. Only half of the frame will be lit.
Part of the frame.
Part of the frame will be lit, and then there'll be a dark band across the part that's not lit because you've gone above the sync speed.
Right. So high-speed sync basically means you can override that maximum shutter speed and shoot, at above 100 or 1/200th of a second and 1/250th of a second. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, if you ever are in a room where there's a lot of available light and you want to cut down on the ambient light, you cut down the ambient light by controlling your shutter speed. Your shutter speed controls the ambient light. So you want to dial it, beyond 1/200th of a second.
A fast shutter speed.
You want a very fast shutter speed.
1/500th of a second. 1/640th of a second.
Yeah. So high-speed sync allows you to do that. So then you can stop down and get, larger or smaller depth of field, whatever your decision is for it. So that's basically what high-speed sync is.
The only thing I'll add is the other place where it's commonly used is outdoors. Outdoors, you got a bright sunny day, so you have harsh shadows. You want to fill those harsh shadows in. And you want to have a kind of a wider aperture to still create those nice images. And that's going to be if you have to shoot at 1/200th of a second outside with an f1.4 or f2.8 aperture, you are going to be getting a ton of light, just boom, right into that sensor. So you can go to a faster shutter speed and still use the flash to fill in the shadows.
That's correct.
Yeah. So high-speed sync. TTL, kind of related to flashes.
Yes. So TTL, I believe what it stands for.
And this is from Mark.
Is through the lens.
Mm-hmm.
And it refers to, using speed lights when you're shooting. And what it means is that when you have a speed light on your camera and you are in ETTL mode or TTL, the camera and the flash are working together to calculate the correct output of the flash for you.
Yep.
So, okay.
Yeah. And
that was it.
I'll just add, it doesn't always have to be associated just with flashes. The camera is doing its metering through the lens as well, just in general, taking a picture. It's deciding on the exposure of the picture by looking through the lens. You say, well, of course it is. Where else would it look? Well, there are other point-and-shoot cameras and other rangefinders that didn't look through the lens, but they had a little sensor, a little light meter next to the lens, and they did their metering there. So, that's all. Kevin wants to know about the alphabet soup on lenses. And there are a lot of letters like IS, VC, OS, HSM, USM, EF, EFS, AF, AFS, DG, DX, FX.
There's just so many.
There's so many. I've actually done a blog post on this, so if you're interested in those, look down below. Basically, there aren't a whole... Each brand has its own kind of like... For image stabilization, for instance, Canon calls it IS. Nikon calls it VR for vibration reduction. Sigma calls it OS for optical stabilization. Tamron calls it VC for vibration compensation. Each brand has their own little, 3 or 4 acronyms for the focusing motor. USM, HSM. So, blog post down below. But yes, Kevin, that's quite confusing. Let's see. We talked about a lot of these. Jean-Christophe asked about distortion and chromatic aberration. Pentaprism versus pentamirror. That, when you look through the little eyepiece on your camera, you are looking through either a pentamirror or a pentaprism. Pentamirrors are a little bit cheaper and easier to make, so you find them in your kind of entry-level and consumer-level cameras. Pentaprism usually really is a piece of glass. Think of a prism you played with probably in science class at some point. Where the light comes in and it refracts it into a rainbow. They let a little bit more light through. You find them in the higher end viewfinders on DSLRs. That's pretty much all there is to say about that. Roy asked about refractography. And this was one of those ones that I had to go look up. I hadn't heard about this yet, and I was explaining it to you. I'm going to talk about it briefly because it's not really a term you need to know, but it's an interesting newish photography technique that involves doing a lot of shooting with your lens off. Completely off. No lens at all on the camera. Now, Gary Entropy out there is thinking, because Gary is the one, excuse me. Gary is the one out there who did the video about dust inside your sensor. But basically what you do in a completely dark room with the camera stabilized and no lens on it, you shine colored light through a flashlight, laser pointer, onto some type of reflective surface that you then kind of manipulate and move, and you get these...
It's really complicated.
It's fairly complicated, but it creates these very surrealistic light paintings. It's another way to do light painting. Yeah, and you don't even need a lens. So for those of you who have been paying a lot of attention to everything I do, in that 70D kit I posted at the beginning of the week and said, what's wrong with this? It didn't come with a lens at all, even though it kind of looked like it did the way they explained it. That would be great. If you bought that, then the only thing you could do is refractography.
Yeah, oh, right.
Refractography. What are you talking about?
I don't know.
Okay. So I think those are the big ones. I bet we missed a bunch. But if there are still terms that you, as we were going, you said, why didn't they talk? Leave a comment down below and we'll hit them next time.
Maybe we'll make it a regular segment. I'm sure there's plenty of jargon that we could talk about.
There's plenty of jargon. But kind of continuing that line of acronyms and things like that is the associations. PPA.
Oh, right.
WPPI.
Yeah.
PEC.
We've touched on this in the past.
We haven't really.
Yes, we've mentioned it.
Okay, we mentioned it. So I had a question this week.
I've never heard of PEC.
That's a photography event something.
Oh, right.
It's kind of professional event photographers.
Yeah, got it.
I had a question this week about, the worth of being a member of these different associations. So what I think is that a lot of beginner photographers trying to make a career, be professional, think joining this and putting the little labels on their website is going to make potential clients look at it and say, oh, they're a member of WPPI. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And, there may be worth in joining some of these things, and I'll let you talk about that in a minute because you are a member of
PPA,
which is?
Professional Photographers Association.
Okay. But I don't think, I just want to caution folks that, slapping this on your website means that you are a real photographer and that you are going to get more clients because of it.
Right.
I don't think we've ever been asked by...
Yeah. So that's a little... I've seen lots of photographers do that, and I think that's a little presumptuous to assume that everybody is doing that just to appear more professional. However, so that's... If that were the case, that is not the reason to join any of these associations. These associations are great for a few reasons. For example, PPA, which is the association that I am a member of, I believe it's like $27 or $30 a month. to be a member, and in return, I have access to $15,000 worth of free equipment insurance.
Well, I wouldn't say it's free if you're paying. It's part of your dues.
Right. But you get it for $20 a month, or $30 a month, which is really next to nothing when you think about the fact that they can reimburse you for the depreciated value of your gear. So that's one of the benefits. I'm pretty sure they offer in an indemnification trust, which acts as some sort of liability insurance that protects you against lawsuits and things like that. They also have a lot of resources for photographers just to learn, and they have classes and workshops, and
all of those are discounted for
Yeah.
PPA members.
But it's not a certification. Let's be clear on that. It's just an organization that allows you to better yourself as a professional if you're a member and you take advantage of all of its benefits. But it really doesn't make you a better photographer, and it doesn't make you more professional. It doesn't give you experience. I mean, it does if you participate and you take the workshops and all of that, but it doesn't automatically make you, a better photographer.
Right.
WPPI is, I think that, there's also a publication, a magazine that you get monthly, I believe Professional Photographer Magazine. So you get an online copy and then a physical copy, and the same thing applies for WPPI, which is a wedding professionals, wedding and portrait photographers industry, or
that sounds right.
Something like that. And they have a big conference which is actually happening next week.
In Las Vegas.
Huge seminar where lots of very, very big established, experienced, knowledgeable photographers in the industry come to talk about tips and teach you everything that they know about, how to build a business, how to shoot, just everything. And you can network, and there's a huge trade show as well where you can you can look at product samples, and there's a lot of value in being a part of it. And so you get a discount to the WPPI conference, so this is the benefit of being a member. And then similar to PPA, there's lots of resources that you can take advantage of, and they make, workshops accessible that you otherwise wouldn't have access to, etc., etc. But again, does not make you a better photographer simply by being a member and paying your dues.
Right. So. And there are some, like the professional event, that you had to be accepted into that and then pay. I have, again, I'm a little presumptuous at times, but I would think that they'd probably be pretty. If you're willing to pay, they're probably pretty willing to bring you in. The qualifications that they use to determine whether or not you can be in there are probably pretty low.
Yeah.
So again, that's not a knock.
And I believe
that's just saying that make sure, look at everything that they offer and take advantage of everything that they offer. Like WPPI, there's tons of members, I'm sure, that don't go to Las Vegas, but they also have a road show. They have trade shows or smaller, workshops all over the country and things like that. So take full advantage if you are going to join one of these associations. Yeah, good. Okay. So we just wanted to say a little bit about that. Professional event certifications.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. And
so that does sound like a certification, actually.
Right. It does, actually, doesn't it? Because it has the word in it.
Right.
There are also state-by-state associations as well.
Yep, there are.
So it's good. So we just switched it up. We did a little bit of discussion, but we want to talk a little bit about news, too. Now, one of the things is, I'm not sure if people watch this podcast to get photography news. If you would like us to cover more news, leave a comment down below and say news, news, news. And we will take that into consideration. But right now, I think the piece that people are looking for are the discussions and kind of the learning and things like that. But I don't know. So let us know. But two pieces of news that I did want to talk about from this last week was the rumor floating around that Canon is pulling out of the entry-level point-and-shoot market.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And why do we speculate that they're pulling out of that market?
There's just no money there.
In terms of, there's no demand, you mean?
There's no demand.
Right.
It's your smartphone. Everybody, not everybody, but everybody has...
Not everybody, but everybody.
Yeah, has a smartphone with a 10, 12, 14, 16, 18,
nicer camera
48
than most of these cameras
megapixel. And that is the camera that is always with you.
Right.
And so why are you going to bring along a point and shoot? And when your point and shoot dies, as many of us do have point and shoots, you going to replace it? Probably not. You were going to use your iPhone or your smartphone to take nice pictures.
You keep it charged all the time already. You don't have to think about charging a battery or swapping a battery. So it's a lot more practical, and the cameras are just really great.
Or getting pictures off of it, although all of these, so not all of these, but so many of these point and shoots have Wi-Fi now.
Yeah, but it's not the same. You're used to using your phone daily, so the experience is a lot more just enticing using your phone.
So now, is there a market for the higher end point and shoots?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And Canon, they didn't say anything about that. I don't see Canon getting out of that market at all.
No.
And there is certainly a market there. Somebody asked me, well, we mentioned this in the last podcast, is HD from a cell phone the same as HD from a DSLR? We are just the sensor sizes. A cell phone sensor is just, a fraction, tiny fraction of the size of a DSLR sensor. And
there's only so much information that you can cram into
that you can capture and cram.
Million pixels or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. So, there's still a place for those bigger sensors. We are going to see them in cell phones more and more. We've seen that already changing. But we'll see that. And now on the other end of the spectrum from talking about point and shoots is the Nikon. Nikon has released, announced, they are officially announcing the Nikon D4S. $6,400 body only. $6,500 body only. Monster of a camera. Is this something you're interested in?
No.
Why not?
Well, to state the obvious reason is the biggest reason is that I shoot on Canon cameras. But if this was Canon releasing a big hefty DSLR, I still wouldn't get it because I'm just happy with my 5Ds and the way that they perform. For my purposes, I would get like another 5D Mark III to replace my 5D Mark II, but I wouldn't get one of those big cameras. I've never found the need for one. I've never really felt like I didn't have enough frames per second to capture a moment or any more light sensitivity. I've been pretty happy with the way those perform, so that would be way too much for my needs.
Right. And one of the things I hear, let's trickle this idea down to folks that aren't in professional settings. I hear from you all quite often, I want to buy a DSLR. And then occasionally I hear from those folks a couple months later that say, well, I've got the DSLR, but now can you recommend a middle-sized point and shoot that I can always have with me? Because they have realized that they don't want to carry this DSLR around with them all the time. So sure, we could run out and we could buy Nikon D4Ss and have the best low light performance, at that price point, at that size. But besides having to buy all extra lenses or different lenses and things like that. But we also have to, as you said, kind of, balance that with what we have to carry around all day and use.
Right.
And so you want to keep that in mind. And, I think the mirrorless market is growing.
Absolutely.
Not quite as fast as people are predicting, though, it seems. I heard an article this week. It's not growing as fast as they thought. People still gravitate to the DSLRs. Again, they're still giving us a better quality. Is it that much better?
But that's the future. I think mirrorless is the future. And I think that there's just been such a growth in, I think like amateur photography, just exponential growth. And the first thing that people gravitate to is the DSLRs because that's what professionals use for the most part. So, they're the people that, after doing a lot of research, come across mirrorless and start considering that as an option. But for the most part, I think the gut reaction is to go to a DSLR. That doesn't mean that that's there to stay, though. I think that more people are going to start noticing the mirrorless and their capabilities, and that they're going to keep getting better and better, and so there's going to be a shift there.
Okay. That's a good note to end the news section on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other news, but that's all we're going to cover for right now. let's dive into just 2 reader questions. I had 2 very similar questions this week. Actually, I had a couple on this, but the names I wrote down. Aaron Dreiss and Utred were asking about using a prime lens, the 50 versus the 40, and on a crop sensor, which do I recommend? Now, before you start, I have to say, because you might say the wrong thing.
Because I'm wrong so much.
No, I didn't say, I said the wrong thing. When I made my video recommending lenses, the best lenses for the 70D, I really sat down and thought about picking one in each category. And I did pick the 51 for the 70D on that crop sensor. But man, it's close to picking the 40. It really depends on what you want. And I'll say that there are many times, and I mentioned this last week when I first moved to the DSLR, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, being quite frustrated with the pictures I was getting. Right, I moved from a point and shoot. I was getting, I thought, great pictures. I took a picture that won an award at a fair, blue ribbon at the local fair. I was very excited. Then I got this DSLR, was taking pictures with the 50, and was not happy with the pictures I was getting. And I was noticing that inside, I was often hitting a wall, literally backing up into a wall to get the shot that I wanted with the 50 on a crop sensor.
So what was it that I was going to say that was wrong?
I don't know, but I wanted. Well, I didn't want you to say definitely the 40, because 2 weeks ago I made a video where I did recommend the 50.
Okay, I understand.
Can I keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So and 2 things I've learned since then. Well, 1, 50 on a crop sensor can be very tight. But 2, I look back at those pictures, and the tendency for beginners in photography, I think, is to capture more than they need. Get close to your subject, get closer to your subject, get closer to your subject.
Right.
And a lot of pictures where I was backing up, I didn't really need to. I could have even taken a step forward, and it would have been a different shot than what I had in my mind, but it would have been a better shot.
So my thoughts on that are that, my gut reaction would be the 40. I agree with the whole idea of challenging yourself by choosing a very, long focal length, like the 50 on the 70D. That's the equivalent of what, an 85 or roughly that.
Just over 80.
So you're really limited especially in indoor spaces, and it does make you really think about what you want to capture when you're limited in that way. However, I really enjoy shooting with the 50 on. Actually, I should say also that my first lens after the kit lens, when I first got my entry-level DSLR, was the 51.8.
And that was on a crop sensor.
On a crop sensor, yeah. And I really, really enjoyed using it, and I think it was the lens that sort of encouraged me and propelled me to, pursue a professional career, because I just had a lot of fun. And I was challenged in many ways, having such a long focal length to work with only at all times. But I really, really found that helped me to challenge myself and to learn and to become a better photographer. That being said, the 40 the 40 is a little bit closer to a 50 millimeter equivalent focal length. It's not quite. I think a closer one would be a 35, but it's a lot closer. And I like the 50 millimeter on a full frame sensor. I like the focal length and all that you're able to capture, and it's still pretty close, and it's still a prime, so you're still challenging yourself. So I would say, if you're really looking to have that extra, however many stops or fraction of a stop of light, go with the 50. If you want a little bit wider but still be challenged, I would say go with the 40.
It's over a stop of light, just so you know.
Over a stop of light.
Yeah.
So if you want...
The 50 gives you over a stop of light.
That's significant.
It is.
Very significant.
It is, yeah. But that 40 focal length, it's really nice.
Yeah,
you see the dilemma? It's tough. It is tough.
Yeah, it is tough. I think if I had to choose, I would choose the 50.
Ooh, I know. And I chose the 50 in that video, but the 40 is tiny. It's not within reach right now, which, makes the DSLR much more portable.
But the 50 isn't that much bigger.
True. Build quality on the 40 is wonderful.
Yep.
So, it's tough.
It's tough.
But, so 50, you are going to be backing up against walls inside. It's going to be a challenge. 40 is a little bit more versatile, but you're giving up some light. Okay? Now, and keep in mind with prime lenses, if you get the wrong thing, you can almost always resell it for very little loss. And in fact, I sold my 50 to a friend for a little bit more than I paid for it. Because that price, when I bought it, it was $75 new from Amazon back a while.
That was a really long time ago.
It wasn't that long ago.
Ages ago.
Ages. I had to etch the order in on stone.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Put it in the teeth of a Tyrannosaurus Rex and then marched it to...
Alright, too far.
Okay.
Took it too far.
Alright. Next question, and last question, from Avanti, who wants to know about shooting raw on vacation. So, you know, we recommend shooting raw.
All the time.
All the time. And does all the time include vacation?
All the time is all the time.
All the time is all the time. Just like everyone is not really everyone.
Right. I would too. I mean, why not?
Well, because it takes up a lot more room.
Yeah, but...
I'm playing devil's advocate.
Vacations are your vacation pictures. You should just get rid of the pictures that you don't like and then keep the raws of the pictures that you do like, which...
Oh, I think there's from the standpoint of let's say they're going out for a week and they've got one 16 gigabyte card.
I see. Well, if you have limited space, that's a different story. Then don't shoot raw if you think you're going to fill it.
Wow, you changed your story so quickly.
Well, because you're going to sacrifice the number of pictures you can take.
I'm going to fix this for you real quick. Buy another 16 gigabyte card.
Oh.
Look, I know budgets are tight, but you can get a decent 16 gigabyte card for $16. Okay.
So say that that's all you have left and you forgot them or they got stolen or something, then don't shoot raw.
Okay. You're sending mixed signals.
Am I?
I'd say shoot raw. And if you plan on shooting a ton, you know, think of it as part of the expense of your vacation. That's how I often justify new purchases. Oh, we're going on vacation. I need X to be able to capture everything or to enjoy myself fully.
You make it sound like you just go crazy spending money right before a vacation. He doesn't.
Okay. She's also got another question about she's shooting cooking videos.
Ooh, can we see those?
I would like to.
I'm really hungry right now.
And she needs to protect her lens from oil.
UV filter.
This is the one time where I think I might say a UV filter is okay to put on your camera. Now, if oil gets on the end of your lens...
Sorry.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Actually, that was when I was thinking about answering this, that was my first thing. First thing is, can you pull the camera back and zoom in a little bit?
Yeah.
So that it's not within splatter range. Because you can put a UV filter on the front of your lens, totally fine.
Yeah. You should probably still do that.
I'm not a fan of that. It does. I get more. Shouldn't say make it sound like I get a ton, but I get questions from people that say I had this weird ghosting in this picture or that picture or this picture didn't look good, and I asked, did you have a UV filter on? Every time the answer is yes. Take it off. Oh, yeah, that problem's gone. So a lot of times they can create problems, but lens hood is going to be good to protect. But if you really got a lot of spawn, what are you cooking there, Avanti? Dial down the oil. No, I'm just kidding. We're not cooking experts. Lens hood, UV filter, but you want to be careful that...
UV filter.
A nice UV filter. You have to spend a little bit more. But you want to be careful that oil's not getting back on top of the lens itself and getting into that mechanism. You want to be careful.
Yeah.
Ziploc bag.
A Ziploc bag, or they sell some really cheap rain covers online that you can just cover. I mean, they're kind of a pain to when you're shooting photos because if you're moving around and stuff. But if you just have the camera set, if you set up your shot and then you cover it, then you should have no problem.
Yeah.
But again, just distance yourself from the area where there's a lot of oil splatters. Get a UV filter, protect your camera, and share those videos with us because
because we're hungry right now.
Yeah, we're hungry.
A video I made last summer, how to protect your camera at the beach, showed how to put your camera in a Ziploc. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? How to put your camera in a Ziploc bag. But I actually show how you can snip one corner and shove the lens through there, and you can still use it in things. Because again, remember, tie it back together with TTL through the lens metering, your camera can be completely covered except for the lens, and it still works just fine, right?
Sure.
Okay. I thought you'd be more excited on that plan. And so you could do that. A UV filter plus a Ziploc bag, and you can get right into that oil.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Don't take our word on that, or his word on that.
So you can see why we call this photo mishmash. We've reached the end. If you have ideas, suggestions, feedback...
Are we announcing the contest winner?
Drum roll. Drum roll. Let's keep drumming. Keep drumming. Keep drumming. It's going to take me a second. We had a giveaway with our wonderful friends at Artifact Uprising. And many of you entered. And now I have to get to... Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to find it. We're going to cut and come back to...
And the winner
is of not my pictures in a woodblock print, but your own woodblock print plus a code to get the pictures, all free, from our friends at Artifact Uprising. Thank them so much for being nice and allowing us to do this giveaway, is Larson. Should I say the last name too? People like their privacy.
Larson V.
Larson V.
How will they claim the prize?
I've already taken care of it.
Oh.
What? Why do you make that face?
It's a little anticlimactic, is all I'm saying.
Well, a bunch of people just found out they didn't win. That was anticlimactic.
Aww, I'm
sorry. It really
what
is.
if there are multiple Larson V's?
There isn't. There isn't.
You mean there aren't?
The Artifact people said, here's your winner. And I double checked that they met all of the requirements, and they're the winner. So, but
I'm just
now,
talking about giving people false hope.
Well, so all of you except for Larson out there didn't win, but this is a really exciting time because we are. I was going to say chugging. We are moving towards 10,000 likes on the Facebook page. And that's exciting. That's really exciting. I appreciate every one of your likes. And I want to say thank you with more stuff. Next week, next podcast.
We're announcing a new giveaway.
We are announcing a new giveaway. Do you know what it is?
I don't know what it is.
It's good. You'll like it. I'm excited. So please stay tuned. We will announce that next week, and there'll be information following up.
Sometime next week.
Sometimes next week. So as I said, suggestions, feedbacks, comments, questions you would like to see answered on the show, leave a comment down below. We like that. And thank you so much for watching. You can see why this is called Photo Mishmash. It's the most appropriate name. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Please subscribe. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, subscribe. You might think, I don't need to subscribe. I just come click through and I check. Those numbers mean stuff. Please click subscribe. Bye-bye. Welcome to another Photo Mishmash episode 9. They were cat ears.
We're doing this again.
Welcome to another Photo Mishmash. This is episode 9. I'm Toby.
And I'm Christina. How old would we be in cat ears? Fuck that. No.
Welcome to another...
No, hang on. I was adjusting my pants.